All right, so stone floor prep over wood subfloor. This is something I see overlooked a lot, at least locally. I don't know about nationally. So natural stone floors over a wood subfloor require 2 layers of plywood. There's a couple of kinds of deflection in wood subfloors. There's joist deflection, which is when your joists are maybe too long to support the weight and they deflect in the center. The other one is subfloor deflection. So in between your 2 joists, you've got that span of subfloor, and although it feels pretty solid, there is a little bit of deflection there, enough to crack some natural stones. So it's not a guaranteed failure if you do stone over a single layer of plywood, but it's a risk that I'm not willing to take anymore in my career. I've done it in the past, and I have had a few issues we'll talk about. So we used to lay tons of travertine, acres and acres of travertine over single layer plywood subfloors, over ditra, over metal lath, over Mapei lath, various different things. Never heard about any problems until once in 2007. I had done a 1,000 square foot travertine floor. The clients had me back a few years later to do some other tile in their house, and they pointed out that there were cracks throughout their kitchen floor in the travertine, and I measured them and they were exactly 4 feet apart. So my assumption was that they were running right along the joists or the plywood sheets. They weren't super noticeable. They decided to not do anything about it. They were okay with it. They were mostly covered by furniture and things. So I started looking online for answers, and that's actually how I found the John Bridge Forum in 2007. And I discovered that stone floors need 2 layers of plywood. So I started putting that into practice. So in this particular scenario, and many others, we don't want to add a 1/2 inch of plywood because we're already doing a thick 3/4 inch thick limestone. So I'm doing a heated floor in here. So to skip one step, I'm going to string the heat cables, pour self-leveling because this floor needs a little bit of leveler, and then I'm going to use a product called Blanke Permat. So Blanke made this product many years ago that they claim replaces the need for an extra layer of plywood under stone floors. I was very skeptical about it for a few years. 6 or 7 years ago, I tried it. I felt like it really stiffened up the floor. I trust it. I'm gonna go ahead and use it here to save us a step. So we're gonna string cables, self-level, and then put permat down instead of adding plywood, self-leveler, heat cables, and then the stone. So if I wasn't worried about adding too much height to this floor, the way I would approach this is I would add a layer of 1/2 inch AC plywood, and there's a specific way that you need to install that, and you can find that in the back of the ditra installation handbook. You can find it online on like the Marble Institute, John Bridge Forum. There's a lot of places that tell you it needs to specifically be installed on a 1/4 offset from the joist and not overlapping exactly the sheets that are on the floor. I'm not going to get into that. If you want to know, just look it up, or it's in the ditra handbook. So I would put down 1/2 inch AC plywood, then I would prime and self-level, and then I would put down like a ditra heat membrane and cables. That's a lot of steps. So in order to skip a step, we're going to prime, string the cables, pour over those, and then put permat down. That saves us some time. Permat's a little more money than doing plywood, but it's faster, so it's kind of sixes, time and money, you know. All right, so I cleaned the floor really good, scraped it, cleaned it, vacuumed, wiped it down with a sponge. I used Plenty Patch to put on the seams just to make sure the self-leveler doesn't soak down into those. Some people use caulking. I used to. That's debatable whether that's necessary or not, whatever. Perimeter dams, keep the self-leveler from going down the edges, also expansion. And so when we're pouring and not using a heat cable membrane, I like to put strips of a heat membrane down with rapid set. And yeah, I have a few staples in them, but we're not using it for uncoupling purposes. We're just using it to string our cables. SunTouch, if you've ever used SunTouch heat cable kits, they come with metal strapping for this application. I just can't get it anymore. That's how we did it for years before the heat membranes came out. So we'll prime. Would have been easier to prime first, but it's more of a sequencing thing. I wanted this rapid set drying. So now that these are all put down with rapid set, I wanted those to get drying so they'll be nice and hard by the time we string cables. We're going to let this thin set and planty patch fire off and then prime this floor with Echo Prime Grip by Mapei. So perimeter expansion and dams, obviously most people know how to do self-leveling, but super important. First time I ever used self-leveler, many years ago, I just stuck a piece of wood over the heat vent. I didn't realize how runny it was gonna be. And I started pouring and it dripped down through the vent onto this guy's taxidermed swordfish that was hanging on the wall. He was freaking out, I was freaking out. We took it down, we took it outside, sprayed it off, cleaned up, all good. That was embarrassing. Don't do that. Hard lesson to learn. All right, so our ditra heat strips are dry with a rapid set. Our primer is pretty dry. I'm gonna start stringing the cables. Here's a little ghetto cable spool holder if you need an idea for one. Works great. Our thermostat is going to be in a cabinet over here, so that's where we're starting. I always like to use a loudmouth sensor. Hot glue gun, one of my most used tools. We're gonna go through after these cables are strung and just put a few dabs of hot glue on each line. That'll keep them from lifting up as we pour self-leveler and just keep them from moving around. I mapped it out, marked my halfway point. If all goes as planned, we should hit that. Nothing worse than getting to the end of a roll and you still need to heat some space, or you get to the end of your space and have a lot of wire left over. Both of those scenarios are not enjoyable. So we're gonna string the cables and then get ready to pour. All right, so we've got the heat cables strung out. We hit our halfway mark, pretty dang close. This gets a little bench right there, so it'll keep the feet warm. This is a vanity. So now I'm gonna go through and just put a tiny dab of hot glue on each bend. The reason is there's a lot of tension in these wires. If one of those corners pops up while you're pouring self-leveler, it can really ruin your day. I mean, big time. I've had that happen and it sucks. And then a couple of dabs on each wire, just through the middle, just to keep them down so they don't float up while you're pouring. So this is a great method if you're doing like a mosaic floor and you can't use a membrane and you want to heat the floor. String your cables out, pour over it, put a cracked membrane over it or something and lay mosaics. It's great for a lot of different applications, but I actually prefer this to working over a membrane. All right, so our heat cable's are ready, thermostat sensor's in. Now I'm gonna set up for our self-leveling heights. So fortunately, the highest point in this floor is right at the doorway, which means that's where the pour will be the thinnest, which is what we always hope for. So I'm gonna use the same laser and block that I use to do my mud pans and mud floors. That X is my line. And I'm gonna go around and hot glue some horseshoes in various points around the room. And then when I pour, I will know that that's the height I need to hit. So there's a big dip in the floor over here. We're gonna be pretty thick right here. I mean, you can see how thick we're gonna be right here. The rest of the floor is just gonna barely cover the wires. It's gonna be pretty deep over here. So I'll glue all those down and that gives me a good gauge to pour to. Then we'll get set up and mix and pour and get out of here. All right, this is our setup for mixing self-leveler. We've got the column mix water dispenser. You just press a button. It gives you exactly how much water you need. This is such a good tool for doing self-leveling, pours, etc. This is Ollie, my freaking awesome helper today. He's been so good. Been carrying lots of heavy stuff. We're gonna get ready to pour this and go home. All right, we got 4 bags in there now. Ollie's mixing up a few more. This is my ghetto spike roller. It actually works better than a spike roller for little pours. Easier to clean too. You want to be careful not to snag your heat cables or trip on them or anything. That really sucks to do. One of the most gratifying things we experience as tradespeople is coming in the next day and looking at our work and see how it turned out. And with self-leveling pours, I mean, sometimes you show up the next day and it's not flat, there's humps in it, or you had a little leak. And I've had that happen a lot of times. And that means you need to practice and learn a little bit more. And there's nothing wrong with that. Totally normal. That's part of honing in the craft. Fortunately, this floor turned out really, really good. I mean, there's my 8-foot level. It's nice and flat. We hit all of our points almost dead on. So now I'm gonna cut off all this expansion foam and I'm going to prime this floor with a self-leveling primer. That will keep it from sucking the moisture out of my thin set while I'm installing that Permat. And this is gonna be such a nice floor to work over. Really happy with it, and it smells good. One thing I didn't really talk about yesterday is choosing the right self-leveling material for the application. There's a lot of different kinds and a lot of different brands out there. Not all of them can be used over a wood subfloor, and many, if not most of those, can't be used over a wood subfloor without adding lath first. So you really need to pick a product, if you're doing this application, that you can use over wood without lath. If it needs lath, sometimes I'll put Mapei lath, the plastic composite lath, over the heat cables and then pour it. This particular product, Mapei Ultra Plan Easy, is a super high-end product. Typically, I don't use it over wood without lath, but where I'm doing Permat over it and I poured it quite thick, 3/8 of an inch, I'm confident in it and Mapei approves it. Shonox is probably my go-to for pouring straight over wood, especially if I'm going to tile right over that. They make some super high-end fiber reinforced products. So do your research. So I always check my pours with my 8-foot level and make sure there's no humps or dips. So this one, no matter where I put it, it's not rocking. That's what I want. I mean, it's just nice and flat in every direction. If there's dips, sometimes I'll skim those out with thin set. If there's humps, sometimes I'll grind them down. We aim to not ever have either one of those, but sometimes you do, and that's fine. If the dips are pretty minor and I'm using a bigger tile, I don't worry about it. If I'm using a mosaic or like penny rounds, I want this floor as dialed in as possible. So yeah, better prep equals a better finished product every time, hands down. It is always worth the effort to do prep and go the extra mile. So not every wood subfloor is suitable to just stick down Permat and stick stone over. In fact, some aren't even suitable to put tile over. If you've got a really spongy subfloor, it might need to be replaced. It might need an extra layer of plywood, which never hurts. An extra layer of plywood helps in so many ways a lot of the time. So these are conversations I always like to have with my clients up front. If they're expecting a smooth transition from hardwood to tile without a step up, then we need to discuss the options of what it's going to take to achieve that. And I'm not willing to do a subpar prep job just to give somebody a smooth transition. It's just not worth it. That's a reality that comes with remodeling sometimes. We have a lot of builders who expect a smooth transition, and we have to have those frank discussions. Like, look, if we're gonna have this, it needs to be built this way. And if it's not built this way, we need to build it this other way, and you may not have a smooth transition. So those are discussions you need to have up front with your clients. Okay, so I've got all my foam trimmed off and cleaned up. Just got a nice clean perimeter, super clean vent. We've got a little under a 3/8 inch pour right here at the doorway, substantially thicker over there. So now I'm gonna prime this floor. So I just use a Mapei Primer L diluted 50/50 with water. I'm gonna roll that on. It's gonna absorb into this really fast. It takes really a few hours to get nice and dry. So I've got some other things to do in the meantime. Organize my mess of a job site for one. This will help substantially with your thin set not drying out, especially like putting down a membrane. If you come in and spread thin set right over this self-leveler, it's gonna suck your thin set dry so fast that it won't even bond to your membrane a lot of the time. So this is just a good precaution to take. Gives you a little more working time and a stronger bond, and make sure it's bonded good. So it's been an hour or so. This primer is dry enough to walk on. It's not quite dry enough to set over yet. It needs to be a little bit drier, but I'm gonna start laying out my membrane here. So these sheets interlock with this mesh. They need to be laid in a direction that this flap overlaps that one, so on and so forth. So each sheet is interlocking. That creates a crazy strong bond right there. So I'm gonna lay out my floor just like you would with tile in a way that I'm not wasting, you know, I don't want any little strips that use up that overlap. I wanna have as big a pieces as possible. These need to be offset and you can see all these different layers of mesh. So I've done some testing with this over a piece of plywood, bonded it, set tile over it, set the plywood like on 2 buckets and stood in the middle of it. And the strength that this adds to plywood is insane. It really is. Pretty crazy strong product. So I've started cutting this in. You just wanna make sure you're always going the right direction. You wanna start kind of right to left because that overlap always needs to be overlapping the next piece on the side and on the front. So I've just kind of gridded out my floor with a few lines and started cutting in my pieces. I don't like to, once I make a thin set, I don't like to be going back and forth cutting membrane. I like to just get it down. So the more prepared I can be, the more fluid the process is. Just cut this stuff with a razor, some tin snips also. I'm gonna mix up some thin set, pretty loose, and start setting. And it's Friday. I think after I do this, I might just go home. So I mix my thin set pretty loose. This is ultralight, which is what I use for pretty much everything. I think it works great for membranes. I love setting mosaics with it. I set 24 by 48s on ceilings with it. It's a good all-purpose mud. I buy it by the pallet. I use other things when the application calls for it, but this is my go-to. I just always have it, like it for almost everything. Makes it pretty loose. You know, I'm not gonna do a notch trowel video because if you're even watching this, you're a tiler and you know how to trowel thin set, but spread it out, tamp it in good. Again, I'm gonna do a coverage check video because everybody does those and they're lame. So check your coverage. I'm gonna start sticking this down. Just go row by row, right to left to make sure my overlaps are correct. And there we go. I forgot to mention when working over self-levelers and plywood, I like to sponge down the surface first. I didn't do it on that piece, but I usually do. It buys you a little more time with your thin set. So you can see these overlaps. This overlaps 1 inch on 2 sides. So every sheet is overlapping. It creates a super monolithic substrate. Similar to what we do with mud, the lath is always overlapped. So I like to work super clean. I like to snap lines that I trowel to. I don't like excess thin set. I don't like thin set on the rim of my bucket. I don't like thin set on me. It's just, it helps me stay more focused. It helps me be more efficient and it helps me not feel like I'm going down the rabbit hole. In 2007, I teamed up with a friend of mine, Don Cash, 20 years older than me. And he was super clean, super efficient, very organized. And I learned a ton from him just about efficiency and cleanliness. And it was awesome to work with him and have him as a mentor. Don, if you're listening to this, I love you, dude. Wish you were still doing tile with me. Hope you're enjoying your retirement. All right, I got that Permat all installed, and at the risk of sounding like a product fanboy, as I wear a different Flow FX shirt every day of the month, thanks Chase. I love this product, it's awesome. The only downside I can think of really is it's hard to snap lines on, but that's not a deal breaker. And then maybe when you're troweling, you can catch these flaps, but again, not an issue. It's gonna be a great subfloor for this 3/4 inch thick honed limestone. And I am going to let this thin set dry over the weekend and go home. There is absolutely no reason for me to be at work anymore at 1 o'clock on a Friday. So take that advice if you wanna live long and prosper.